2 light planes fell to the ground after colliding in uncontrolled airspace around midday at Belembla Park near Oakdale. The 3 occupants of both aircrafts died on impact. The debris was scattered across bushland at 2 separate crash sites. Police say 2 people were in a plane returning from Cessnock to Shellharbour Airport when the crash occurred. The impact caused its wreckage to burn. The second plane took off from the Oaks airfield. Its debris has been located about 1 kilometre away. There was a large emergency services response with 10 ambulances attending the scene. Emergency services say witnesses saw debris coming from the sky before rushing to the crash site to help.
I take my hat off to those people that have actually run into harm's way to assist those people. Unfortunately, upon reaching that scene, they would have very quickly established there's probably not much could have been done to save the people on board.
The paramedics are saying that it was a very confronting scene with, patients that they would have liked to assist, but unfortunately there was nothing that they could have done.
Police say they're still trying to find out the ages and genders of the deceased. At this stage, the cause of the crash is unknown. Officers will guard the sites overnight until a team from the Australian Transport Safety Bureau arrives from Canberra tomorrow.
Smoke on Sydney's southwestern outskirts, the first sign something horrible had happened.
We tragically located the remains of an aircraft that had caught fire on impact with the ground. That's a sad and tragic outcome.
Just before midday, 2 light aircraft collided mid-air. Locals heard the crash, engines spluttering, then the impact.
We were inside and we heard a big bang, big loud bang, and then we just sort of went outside to have a look, and we've seen a lot of big thick black smoke coming from the back of our property. Both planes hitting dense scrub, a vast debris field, 2 crash sites a kilometre apart. It sparked bushfires and a massive emergency response as fire crews put out flames. Paramedics confirmed the worst. There were no survivors.
The first aircraft location, that there are 2 persons that are deceased. And in the second aircraft location, there is 1 person that is deceased.
The paramedics are saying that it was a very confronting scene with patients that they would have liked to assist, but unfortunately there was nothing that they could have done at the time.
This was one of the planes, a yellow Cessna 182 with 2 people on board. It had earlier left Cessnock Airport bound for Wollongong. The other plane, a white-coloured Jabiru, had only just taken off from the nearby Oaks landing ground when they somehow collided. How that happened, now the subject of a major investigation by the Australian Transport Safety Bureau.
We do have witnesses that have reported seeing debris coming from the sky. Those people will be spoken to by detectives and by the ATSB. The airspace that we're currently in at the moment is uncontrolled airspace.
It's understood the smaller Jabiru that left this airfield had only been airborne minutes when the collision happened. It's home to 2 flight schools and a tight-knit community of pilots who all want answers. Tonight, so too do investigators and most of all, families. Now, these 3 victims are all understood to be men, although formal identification is still taking place. Investigators from the ATSB are currently en route to this scene from Canberra, and these 2 crash sites will remain under police guard until they arrive. Over the next few days, they'll be conducting important investigations, sifting through wreckage, trying to recover crucial aviation components. They're also asking for anyone who might have been around this area today, who saw these planes, perhaps witness the impact or even have video of it, to get in touch with police or contact them on the ATSB website.
Saudi Arabia has broken ground on what is said to be the world's largest building, the Mukaab, right in the heart of Riyadh. The Mukaab is not your typical skyscraper. Imagine a 1,300-foot tall, 1,200-foot wide cube, so massive it could fit 20 Empire State Buildings inside of it. This $50 billion project is part of a larger initiative to bring futuristic construction to Saudi Arabia, all under Crown Prince Mohammed bin Salman's Saudi Vision 2030. More than a building, the Mukaab is being designed as a city in a box, complete with fine dining, luxury retail, offices, and enough residential space to house over 100,000 people. There will also be 9,000 hotel rooms and even green spaces accessible within 15 minutes of any location in the cube. And if that's not enough, the Mukaab will also offer immersive experiences powered by artificial intelligence. We're talking about holographic projections, virtual reality on the exterior walls, and scenes that can make you feel like you're in another time or place. But it's not just futuristic. The design draws inspiration inspiration from local Najdi architecture with a cube shape that some critics say resembles the Kaaba in Mecca. While supporters view it as a celebration of culture, there are concerns over the comparison. Human rights groups are raising other fears, particularly around the displacement of local communities and potential exploitation of migrant labor. Past projects like the Neom development have seen similar criticism and reports of forced evictions. For all the ambition and vision here, Mukaab is expected to add $51 billion to Saudi Arabia's non-oil GDP and create over 300,000 jobs. With construction set to finish by 2030, only time will tell how these projects will shape Saudi Arabia's future. We'll keep you updated on every milestone as the Mukaab takes shape. For Straight Arrow News, I'm Jack Allen.
Breaking news just coming in from Pakistan. A suicide bomber detonated a checkpoint in western Pakistan, killing 8 people and wounding 5 more. According to reports, the bomber set off the blast from the back of a motorbike rickshaw near the town of Mir Ali in Khyber Pakhtunkhwa province. 4 police officers have been killed alongside 2 members of a state paramilitary force and 2 civilians in the attack near the border with Afghanistan. And for the latest update, now we are being joined on the phone line by a Pakistan Bureau Chief Anas Malik. Anas, suicide attack in North Waziristan. Reports said the suicide bomber targeted a police post in Mir Ali. Give us the latest.
Well, what we know so far is that the suicide bomber has indeed detonated at a checkpoint in Mir Ali in North Waziristan of Khyber Pakhtunkhwa, which is just off the border with Afghanistan. What officials have confirmed that at least 8 people have been killed and another 5 have been injured. While more details are, as we speak, are yet awaited, the terrorist group Tehreek-e-Taliban Pakistan's affiliate Hafiz Gul Bahadur group, the HGG, that have claimed the responsibility of this targeted checkpoint suicide bombing, while identifying the suicide bomber as Yahya Banuchi. Now, it is also pertinent to mention that this particular group has been responsible for cross-border skirmishes. In fact, in March this year, when Pakistan in a raid display acknowledged an airstrike across the border in Afghanistan, the Pakistani military said, and the Foreign Office said, that it had targeted hideouts of the Hafiz Gul Bahadur group. Isha?
Thank you so much, Anas, for joining us with the latest on this. Breaking news coming in from Iran. At least 10 police officers have been killed in a terrorist attack in an area southeastern Iran. While there is no clarity on how the attack took place, reports say police vehicles were attacked in Sistan Baluchistan province's Taftan County. The attack occurred some 1,200 kilometers southeast of the capital of Tehran. No group has claimed responsibility for it. Sistan Baluchistan borders Pakistan and Afghanistan and is one of the most impoverished provinces in the Islamic Republic. It is home to a large number of the Baluch minority, an ethnic group spread between Iran, Pakistan and Afghanistan. In contrast to the country's predominantly Shiite population, this group practices Sunni Islam.
Outside Nigeria, Iran has emphasized that the country has a right to defend itself after at least 2 soldiers were killed in Israeli strikes on Tehran, Khuzestan and Elam. The Israeli Defense Forces say the strikes are in response to months of continuous attacks from Iran, following a barrage of Iranian missiles fired on the 1st of October. Meanwhile, the United Nations Secretary General Antonio Guterres says he's deeply alarmed by the continued escalation in the Middle East. Mr. Guterres is calling on all parties to cease military actions, including in Gaza and Lebanon, and exert maximum effort to prevent an all-out regional war.
All right, now to give us more perspective in terms of what, of course, is happening at this moment in West Asia, we're being joined by Mr. Giorgio Cafiero, who's the CEO of the Gulf State Analytics. He's joining us live on this broadcast. Mr. Cafiero, let me in fact start off by asking you this. On the 23rd of October, the Israeli Defense Minister Yoav Gallant, while speaking with his soldiers at one of the Israeli military bases, said that when Israel will carry out its attack on Iran, the world will witness the might of the Israeli nation. And now Israel has carried out this attack, but this by a lot of people has been described as a sort of a face saver of an attack. What is your assessment of the Israeli attack on Iran?
Yeah, thank you. Really good to be on your program today. Well, it's obvious that in response to the double wave ballistic missile attack that Iran carried out against Israel at the start of this month, the Israelis obviously felt that they had no choice but to respond. But to your point, there's no denying that this was quite a limited and cautious response, hitting military bases in Iran while not hitting any of the oil or nuclear facilities. Of course, we don't know if there are going to be follow-up Israeli strikes. We don't know if Iran is going to retaliate. But I think there's good reason to think that the Iranian government will continue putting energy into efforts to send out a message that this was a very insignificant attack. Their message is that, well, they're going to basically be mocking this attack for being so insignificant. And if that's the case, I think it's possible that we won't see much escalation. But the overall trajectory, I think, remains one of escalation. And there's no denying that Israel could hit back again and do much more damage. But again, I think you bring up a very valid point that the attack that took place this morning was indeed very limited and probably much more about saving face. Right. But at the same time, I think it's possible that it did some damage to Iran's defense capabilities. So I think it could potentially be a bit more than symbolic, but not entirely sure.
All right, we'll talk a bit more about, the options that Israel perhaps may want to exercise in the future. But at the moment, according to reports that have come in, more than 100 Israeli fighter jets were reportedly involved in this operation. Now, there's a considerable amount of distance, 1,700 odd kilometers that separates Iran and Israel. Which of these nations in between Israel and Iran do you think would allow the Israelis to use their air space to carry out these attacks on Iran?
My understanding is that Jordanian and Iraqi airspace was used. That is certainly not to say that either of those governments consented to that. We're still trying to figure out all the facts here. I'm not exactly sure what all the details are with respect to the airspace that was used and the knowledge that Arab officials had in advance of this operation. But again, that's my understanding that it was Jordanian and Iraqi airspace. It is certainly significant that the GCC countries made it very clear that Israel would not be permitted to use their airspace. And then right after this operation took place, all 6 of the GCC members came out to condemn it with rather strong language. So obviously, the idea of the Gulf Arab states facilitating this attack is so far removed from the current reality.
And also, looking ahead as to what could happen in the immediate future, you say that we are still on a trajectory of escalation, that is a reality that has not gone away. But going forward, do you expect the Israelis to try launch another direct attack on Iran as things stand at the moment?
My fear is that in this new era defined by the quote-unquote new rules of engagement, direct attacks between Iran and Israel risk becoming normalized, sort of a fact of life in the Middle East. And therefore, I'm quite pessimistic, and I think it's probably just a matter of time until there's a resumption of these direct attacks between Iran and Israel, especially so if the conflicts in Gaza and Lebanon continue without ceasefire being implemented. I think probably for now, there's a good chance that this latest round has come to an end and there won't be further escalation in the immediate term. But like I said, we're in a period defined by these new rules of engagement. The stakes are higher, more unpredictability in the region, very, very dangerous set of circumstances.
All right, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much indeed, Mr. Giorgio Kefiro, for joining us and getting us that perspective there.
Chris Doyle is a director and spokesperson of Council for Arab-British Understanding. He's now joining us live from London. Mr. Doyle, thank you very much for making time for us and welcome. What is going to happen next now that we know that Israel has told Iran not to retaliate, but there are so many critics who are saying that if Iran decides to retaliate for the strikes that Israel did, then this escalation is going to be worse and uncontrollable?
We have many, many questions right now and very few answers. We only can rely on partial information as to the extent of the Israeli strikes, and in many ways that will determine how Iran responds to them. How many Iranians or others were killed in the strikes, for example, the extent of the damage, and to what way that Iran will perceive this as a violation of its sovereignty that it needs to do something about. But the context, of course, is one in which we have now, without question, a regional war in the Middle East. These are strikes that Israel conducted both on Syria and on Iran that have followed, of course, Iranian strikes on Israel twice this year in April and most recently, of course, on the 1st of October. So we're into a situation of missile ping-pong at one level, but also engagement between Israel and Iranian allies such as Hezbollah in Lebanon and Hamas in Gaza, even the Houthis in Yemen, as well as a considerable number of strikes in Syria itself. So the situation is precarious. It's not clear where any de-escalation, let alone a ceasefire, is going to come from, because the United States doesn't seem to be taking the lead in getting this at all. We have seen various envoys from the United States, including Secretary of State Antony Blinken, come to the region, but leave empty-handed. And if anything, many people in the region believe that the United States is comfortable, the Biden administration, with what has happened in recent weeks, that they have green-lighted the Israeli invasion of Lebanon and are going to be pretty comfortable with these Israeli strikes on Iranian military targets.
Mr. Doyle, let's talk about that ceasefire, because now that you brought it up, this region is seemingly volatile. It's getting worse by the day. There are some countries in this region which are stable. There are those critics who would say, why are these countries not engaging Israel with the other countries like Lebanon or Syria or Iran in this matter, to try and resolve their issues? Why do they have to rely on the United States? Why do they have to rely on the West? Who can broker a peace deal within the region?
Well, there are many different facets to answering that question. I think, first of all, that it is the United States has the key influence on Israel. And Israel is the dominant actor in this, in that it is a military superpower in terms of the region, an economic powerhouse, and one with a lot of diplomatic clout. So without the United States, it's very difficult to influence Israel. Then, of course, you have an array of different Middle East actors, some with differing views. And I think what one doesn't see is them working together to try to find that sort of path towards de-escalation. They have differing agendas. Saudi Arabia and the United Arab Emirates, for example, have today condemned the Israeli strikes on Iran. Now, that is somewhat of a surprise if you wanted to go back 4 or 5 years ago, because both those countries might have been expected to be somewhat more silent about this because they had a more anti-Iranian posture. But you'll remember, of course, that Iran and Saudi Arabia came to understandings last year, brokered by China. And I think it shows the nervousness of particularly the Gulf Arab states about the implications of a broader regional war, that Iran, for example, might decide to respond against their interests. Now, this was a particular threat if Israeli strikes had hit Iran's oil and gas infrastructure. It seems that the United States did have an influence in ensuring that the strikes were on military targets alone, and we believe that it wasn't against nuclear sites. But certainly I think there is a failure of leadership. That failure of leadership is not just amongst the actors who are engaging in this conflict is at the international community level, the key major powers, and as you suggest in your question, amongst regional leaders.
Okay, we'll have to leave it there. Thank you very much. I've been talking to Mr. Chris Doyle, who's the director and spokesperson for Council for Arab-British Understanding. Mr. Doyle, as always, thank you for your time.